It was the most photographed and videotaped day in history. Two of the world's tallest buildings destroyed by hijacked planes. The next day, newspapers published photos of the horror. But there were some images so awful, they provoked rage across the world. These were the pictures of people falling. One photo of a falling man was the most controversial of them all. It was branded distasteful, exploitative, voyeuristic. It was never seen again. The images that came to symbolize the day were those of the heroic rescuers working in the rubble. But some argued that the picture of the falling man needed to be confronted. It not only acknowledged the story of the people who'd been forced to jump, it alone gave a true sense of the horror of that day. The quest to identify one man became a quest to give name and voice to that horror. A journey to help America learn and recover from its darkest day.
The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey welcomes you to the observation deck of the World Trade Center. We are traveling in a Lotus elevator at a speed of 20 miles per hour.
When they were completed in 1971, they were the two highest buildings in the world, standing 110 stories high. The World Trade Center was a beehive of human activity. Up to 250,000 people walked through its doors every day. Bond traders, executives, waiters, dishwashers, tourists, cleaners.
Windows on the World Trade Center. My name is Ernest Scott.
Please watch your step as you exit.
It was the tower's height that never ceased to amaze, standing an extraordinary 1,500 feet above the ground. September the 11th, 2001 was just another ordinary day.
Humidity recently, the high 80, dropping to 60 tonight, up to 78 with sunshine tomorrow, 76 Thursday. This is Steve Torrey. It appears Michael Jordan will indeed be coming out of retirement.
8:46 a.m. Flight 11. 9/11. Certain phrases have become shorthand for the worst attack on American soil in history. When it was all over, the world preferred to remember the heroic images of the rescuers and how the American spirit had prevailed. The impact cut a swathe through floors 93 to 99, instantly killing hundreds. Almost immediately, broadcasters began to transmit images across the world.
Let's get this live update from 1010 West
Initially, most people could only react to the breaking news. One of the world's tallest buildings wounded by an errant aeroplane. But for anyone with a relative inside or nearby, the immediate thought was for their safety.
I turned to my computer and I typed, hey, are you there? Meaning, are you at work? He worked for Bloomberg LP. And I was going to give him a heads up not to go downtown because of what had happened. So I get a response back that says, yes, I'm here. I'm on the 106th floor. There's a lot of smoke. I'm scared. I couldn't process that information. I was like, 106th floor of what building? And that's what I turned around and typed back to him. And he wrote back, windows on the World Trade Center.
Peter Alderman was one of 170 people at Windows on the World restaurant that morning. There were diners, chefs, waiters, and kitchen staff. Michael LaMonaco, the executive chef, would have been there too, but he was running late because he'd stopped at an optician's.
How could that happen? How could a plane on this beautiful, crystal clear, blue sky day, run into the building? How could that happen? I started to take stock of, who's up there, what's happening at windows. I tried to take a mental roll call to try to recall who was there at that moment. I knew there was nothing that I could do, but I couldn't leave. And all I could think about were my friends, my colleagues, my coworkers. And trying just desperately to pray that they could get out, that they could get to the fire exits, get down those fire stairs.
But for nearly 1,000 people on the upper floors, there was no exit. They were trapped. The plane had sliced through the elevator shafts. The emergency staircases were impassable.
The plane hit the North Tower in a very central way, resulting in the fuel from the wings pouring into the building itself. The fuel and the fire that was created in the instant that it hit spread so far that the people standing in the lobby were burned from the fireball that came out of the elevator shaft. And you could see the smoke coming out from all the way up above Windows in the World within minutes of the impact.
Those that could get out did. But for the others above the crash site, the heat and thick smoke was already making it difficult to breathe. In some places, impossible. But the watching world could only guess at the terrible conditions inside. Only those in direct communication realized that the danger had spread far beyond the crash site, and that casualties might number, not into the tens, but into the hundreds, even thousands.
I was freaking out. I was crying, and my boss came into my office, and he's like, it's okay, it's just a fire, they're going to put it out, and he's okay. So I wrote back again to him saying, can you get out? And he wrote back, no, we are stuck.
The people trapped on the upper floors inundated the emergency services with calls, pleading for help. At the point of impact, temperatures were reaching over 1,000 degrees centigrade. As the flames consumed everything in sight, the smoke was becoming increasingly toxic. In desperation, windows were broken to let in fresh air. This only made things worse. For some people, there was only one option left. Among the bystanders was photographer Richard Drew.
I was standing between a police officer and a woman EMS worker, and all of a sudden the woman says, "Oh, look," and then she pointed up, and we both looked up, all three of us looked up, and the people started coming down from the World Trade Center. Bodies were falling, so I instinctively picked up my camera and started taking pictures. That's what I do. It's like a carpenter, he has a hammer, he builds a house, I have a camera, I take pictures.
Numerous people talking. Numerous people.
You could hear the sound. They would fall to a certain point, and then I couldn't see them anymore because my view was obstructed from where I was. But you could always hear them hitting the ground like a sack of cement, a big thud.
Broadcasters were pulling back. They weren't showing the people falling. They were reporting them.
People are jumping out the windows. Over there, they're jumping out the windows, I guess, because they're trying to save themselves. I don't know.
But pulling back didn't spare people from the horror. Because then the unbelievable happened. Something that made it clear that the first plane wasn't an accident. When United Airlines Flight 175 crashed into the South Tower, Millions saw it live.
Down Broadway from the vantage point of City Hall. I've now moved inside a building, but all the buildings along Broadway here at City Hall are being evacuated. On my way
Now,
up to this building,
the 1,000 people trapped in the North Tower were joined by 600 in the South. One man, arriving at his office across the river in New Jersey, however, was unaware of the attacks and the awful predicament his wife now found herself in.
The phone rang, and it was my friend Bill, and he said, do you know what's going on at the World Trade Center? And I said, no. He knew Elaine worked there. We've been friends for many years. And he said, well, a plane hit the North Tower, and I knew Elaine worked in the South Tower. So I said, well, that's horrible, but let me see what I can find out. My secretary came in and told me that Elaine was on the phone. The first thing I said was, well, thank God you're okay. And she said, well, not really. And she told me that smoke was coming into the room, it was coming through the vents, and that there had been an explosion beneath them. She didn't know a plane hit.
Elaine Gentle had seen the North Tower hit and had immediately began helping her colleagues to evacuate. She was on the 97th floor when the second plane struck, and was now among those trapped.
As she was speaking to me, I could hear her voice. Her breath was labored, and I remember saying, don't breathe so hard, try to relax. When I asked why they didn't try to go down, she said it was really hot out there. And she meant the area near where the elevators and the stairwells were. I didn't understand that. But it was evident to me just from her breathing that it was becoming impossible to be there anymore. She said to me, I'm scared. She wasn't a person who got scared. And I said, honey, it'll be all right. It'll be all right. You'll get down. You'll get down.
Elaine said that she and her colleagues felt they only had one choice: to put wet clothes over their head and to try to get out.
She said to me that she loved me, and she said to tell the boys that I loved them. And I was shocked that she was saying this to me. I said, of course I will, but it's going to be all right. And she said, I love you. And I said, I love you. And she said, I love you. And I said, I love you. And then I said, call me when you get down. And when I hung up the phone, I was horrified.
Jack Gentle doesn't know what happened next, but he knows where it all ended.
I know that Elaine was found on the street in front of the building across from hers. So whether she jumped or fell, I don't know. I believe she was alive when it happened because of that phone call. I hoped that she had succumbed to the smoke, but it doesn't seem likely. It's something I can't know. In some ways, it might just be the last element of control that you have. Everything around you is happening and you can't stop it. But this is something that you can do. And to be out of the smoke and the heat, and to be out in the air, it must have felt like flying.
At 9:58, the South Tower fell. extinguishing in an instant the hopes of hundreds inside. The photographer Richard Drew caught the moment.
I think the camera is sort of a filter for me between me and what I'm photographing, and I'm only seeing what's coming through my lens, and that helps me sort of separate it, I guess, psychologically.
What Drew didn't realize was that it already captured an image so shocking, so representative of the horror of the day, that it would ignite controversy and anger across the world.
All the airports are closed down, the roads are closed down. The twin disaster at the World Trade Center happening shortly before 9 a.m. and right around 9 a.m. And then just a little while ago, a third explosion, which actually brought down the South Tower. 1010 was reported Julia Papa is down around...
More than an hour had passed since the North Tower had been hit. On the ground, people were traumatized by what they were seeing. Not just the burning buildings, but bodies falling. Some people had been blown out by the initial explosions. Some may have slipped, but it was clear that some were being forced into an impossible decision.
The fire continued to spread, burning up the furniture and office papers and the combustible materials throughout the buildings, and the tower itself became like a chimney, sending the smoke up towards the top of the tower. And as time passed, the situation became desperate. There was a long period of time where people were just, hanging out by the windows, waving things. You saw one man just, waving a long white, is it a tablecloth? It's not clear.
They were people that I knew. There were people waving jackets or tablecloths or napkins. There were people waving, crying out for help. And they were people that I knew so well. And that only made it worse.
Firefighters were climbing the stairs, trying to reach the upper floors. They could get nowhere near. Some people had tried to escape to the roof, but found the access door locked. But it wouldn't have helped anyway. The thick smoke made it impossible for helicopters to land. Peter Alderman was one of 70 people stuck in an office on the 106th floor. He sent 7 text messages between 9:07 and 9:25 to friends and family. His growing desperation was clear.
Someone had asked him if they could evacuate the building, and he said, we can't even move. When I spoke to him, he said, no, we're stuck. And I took stuck to be, maybe in a room or something, but can't move. To me, that sounds much, much worse. He said the room was filling with smoke, so, the situation was definitely deteriorating as the minutes were going by.
You're able to see more and more people assembling at the windows. As time is passing, not only are they assembled at the windows, but they're stacked upon each other at the windows. Acting, I'm sure, with an irrational search to somehow breathe. Pushing up against the windows and bodies lying upon each other. Some people, in fact, were actually hanging out of the windows and holding on across the steel that divided the windows. They were just so desperate to get air. Imagine leaning out of the 109th floor of the World Trade Center. No rational person would ever do that.
Holy shit! Oh my God! Numerous people jumping. Numerous people.
There were things that were so big that were falling. And it was terrifying. and horrifying to think I didn't recognize the objects I was seeing as people. Maybe that thought was just too horrendous, too horrifying to me.
Others did see what was happening. Lonely, 10-second journeys. A very public way of dying. The only visible fatalities in a day that claimed thousands.
Clearly, we're in the middle of the worst ever act of terrorism directed at the United States on domestic soil, and it may not be over.
Thomas McGuinness was trapped just below the crash zone. His wife, Ileana, had been desperately trying to reach him for over an hour.
The receptionist said, Thomas is on the phone, and right away I took it. He says, this doesn't look good, this doesn't look good. And I said, you're right, oh my God, this is like World War III. And I'm not thinking something's wrong because he's on the phone, he's calling me, so he must be okay. He must be at the bar or in the street, or he's using somebody else's cell phone, or he's on a payphone. And he says it again, he just says it like 3 times in a row. And something in the way he says it, he was calm about it, but something said to me, something's not right. And I started to get nervous, and I got upset too. I was upset, like mad at him, like, are you okay? And he said it again, this doesn't look good, this doesn't look good. And I said, just answer me, yes or no, are you okay? And that's when he said, we're in a conference room on the 92nd floor.
The fire was working its way down to the 92nd floor. As Thomas McGuinness talked to his wife, it was nearly upon him.
That's when he said to me, he goes, Ileana, you don't understand. There are people jumping from the... Sorry. He said there are people jumping from the floors above us. And that's when I just was like, oh my God, this is very bad. Because I'm thinking, I mean, one thing is when you're on the 3rd floor or the 4th floor and there's a fire and you jump because you think, okay, I've got to escape this fire. And you think, well, I might survive, I might get broken legs or broken back, or, you know, but these people are jumping to their deaths. That's how desperate they are that they're jumping to their deaths. And I'm just thinking about these poor guys in this room, not for 5 minutes, but for an hour, dealing with that and knowing that something terrible is going on up there and that it's coming down to us too because we can't get out of here. And so I know that for him, it was a goodbye call. But I just wasn't ready to accept that. But I know that it was for him because he said, I love you, take care of Caitlin, who's our little girl. You're coming home tonight, you're coming home tonight. He says, if we get out of here, it's going to be a miracle. And the last thing he said was, I got to get down on the floor. And that's when I lost the connection. And I tried again, but I couldn't get through. There was no dial tone, there was nothing.
Thomas McGuinness's call was the last voice ever heard from the North Tower. 3 minutes later, the tower collapsed. By then, as many as 200 people had fallen from the sky. A couple of hours later, the photographer Richard Drew was back at the Associated Press newsroom at Rockefeller Center. He was now methodically working his way through the images he'd shot.
You photograph what's there in front of you. You just instinctively take pictures of what's there. So I started looking at the pictures of the falling people. I called one of our senior editors who was there at the time over to start looking at the images with me, and I said, I really like this one. It really hit you. It's just something, that certain something that you recognize. I see this not as this person's death, but as a part of his life. There's no blood, there's no guts. It's just a person falling.
Within minutes, Drew's falling man joined thousands of images arriving in newsrooms across the world. Among them was the Morning Call, a typical mid-sized American newspaper based in Allentown, Pennsylvania.
My first reaction to it was horror. I knew it was happening. There were reports of it on television, but TV stations weren't showing bodies falling from the tower.
My mind right away went to, are we going to print this? And I felt we wanted to print it, but could the person be identified, you know? First thing I tried to do is look very closely to see, and I couldn't.
The editors wanted to choose images that best captured the story. To gauge opinion, they pinned many on the wall. Among them was the falling man.
I felt like I was punched in the stomach. You know, it was such a strong image. It was hard to look at. You feel like it's a private moment. You feels almost obscene looking at this. You feel like you're taking away the person's humanity a little bit. I said I had the same reaction to the Eddie Adams photo where the South Vietnamese police chief stepped up to the Viet Cong prisoner, put the pistol to his head and shot him in the temple. It's just the last moment of a person's life. Naomi's reaction was, exactly, it is just like that Eddie Adams photo, and that's a Pulitzer Prize winning photo, and that's exactly why we should run it.
At the afternoon news meeting, as the staff tried to absorb the day's events, the editor canvassed opinion.
By the time we got to the news meeting, I recall there were probably a few voices for concern. We still discussed the concern. Naomi was very passionate about the photo. She believed there are photos in history that are flashpoints that really kind of get at the truth. I mean, they're hard to look at, but there are certain photos that just tell the story. And in this case, it got to the humanity in a way that other photos, even that might be more graphic, would not.
This particular photo that separated it from all the other photos was the quietness and the body position. I saw grace. I saw a stillness, even though I know that he was falling. I saw a quietness in that, as opposed to a loud, horrible, burning death.
The Morning Call decided to publish the Drew image, putting it on the back page of the first section. It carried the photo larger than any newspaper in the country.
You have to know, going into this, that you're going to get reader response, and it's going to be heavy and it's going to be angry. And a lot of it can be misdirected anger, but we get it.
On the morning of September the 12th, 170,000 copies of the paper carrying the image of the fallen man were distributed throughout the Morning Call's region. Allentown is so typically American that it's regularly used by pollsters to canvass American opinion. Its response was unequivocal.
To the editor, it was with utter disgust that as I read the September 12th edition, I turned a page only to see a large photo of some poor soul plummeting 1,000 feet headfirst to certain death.
Do not let your children read the Morning Call. The half-page colored picture of a man falling out of the window was used in such poor judgment.
I'm not an angry guy. I'm pretty much a very passive person. Nothing phases me. I'm very lighthearted. But that day, that picture, just made me angry.
We had more response on this photo than I believe we've ever seen on any photo published. And a passionate response. And that's saying a lot. Never really seen something like that. Many people just didn't want to look at it, and they were angry.
you knew that a few seconds earlier that person had to make a decision. They were executed, but they had the choice in the manner of how they were going to die. They were either going to fall to their death or they're going to be burned alive in the building. There was no third choice. And when you saw that photograph, you immediately knew that this person had thought those thoughts, had made his decision, and acted on it.
We had to capture the enormity of this event. There had never been anything like it prior, and the images were absolutely critical. I really think it did cause anybody who looked at that photo to think about that, what would I do? I thought about that myself. You know, what choice would I make? And the absolute horror of making that choice. And I think maybe that's the personal space that we went to with some people where they thought about what would their personal choice be. We've not run it since that day, since September 12th. We just couldn't, scratch at that scab again and open that wound.
But the photo had already been published, and the reaction in Allentown was mirrored around the world. But some who saw it couldn't get it out of their mind.
I remember seeing that picture. It stopped me. There was something that was every day about the person who was in it. You know, he looked like any guy who you see in the city, and yet there was something, forever remote about him. I mean, how could you ever possibly get to that experience? He seems almost perfectly composed. This is impossible. This picture, it should be, and it will go everywhere. I never saw that picture again.
The photo had disappeared from public view in a remarkable, spontaneous act of self-censorship. Newspapers and magazines decided not to run it again. No one wanted to confront the existence of the jumpers. In the days following September the 11th, there was a desperate search for survivors. 10,000 were feared dead or missing under the rubble. Firefighters worked tirelessly around the clock, hunting for any sign of life. Americans had recoiled from the falling man. But now, pictures of the rescuers was something the nation could celebrate and rally around.
The images that lasted are, in the most cases, heroic pictures. There was a spin that came out of our feeling of being so deeply wounded on that day, which was that, we're Americans, and you may have knocked our buildings down, you may have killed nearly 3,000 people, but the American spirit shall prevail. Whereas Richard Drew's picture, the Falling Man picture, became, for whatever reason, the picture that nobody wanted to look at.
But Tom Janot, a prize-winning writer on American culture, could not stop looking. He felt the falling man was the defining image of September the 11th and decided to investigate why the jumpers had been airbrushed from the day.
I talked to the coroner's office in New York. I asked them for a count of how many people jumped that day. And what the woman from the coroner's office said was, nobody jumped that day. They were blown out. They were forced out. We don't say that they jumped. Nobody jumped. That just made me feel that there was just something going on that was not familiar American territory about dealing with tragedy. There were just things about that day that you weren't supposed to say, you weren't supposed to see, you weren't supposed to talk about. And for me, that resistance wound up centering on and attaching itself to Richard Drew's picture.
Genoa was not alone in his curiosity. A few days after the image was published, a Canadian journalist was asked to identify the falling man.
An editor called me with what I thought was a ludicrous request. He wanted me to find out who the man was and tell his life story. And my first thought was, good luck. You know, I don't think it's possible to get the identity of one person in an image like that. But I decided to try.
The worst ever act of terrorism directed at the United States on domestic soil, and it may not be over.
In the days after September the 11th, America was in shock and in mourning. The country closed in on itself.
The full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families, and to conduct a full-scale investigation.
News cautions that the Israeli government sources believe Osama bin Laden is in fact responsible.
Who committed this act?
Peter Chaney began his hunt for the falling man by having the image enhanced.
I saw that he was black or Spanish, he had a goatee, and the jacket was more like a waiter's jacket, and he had black pants and a particular type of shoe. He was wearing what looked like a restaurant worker's outfit. Based on the odds, I thought that this guy had most likely come from the windows on the World Restaurant.
You have to check like 4 or 5 hospital lists. We couldn't find anything. And,
There were thousands of people desperate for information about their missing loved ones.
And they were trapped. You know, she was on the 79th floor, so everything around them had collapsed already.
If I don't find him, I have to start all over again. It's taken me my entire life to find him, and I don't know what I will do without him.
But no one wanted to lay claim to the falling man.
For 2 or 3 days, I worked non-stop to try and track down who this person might be. But I seemed to be getting nowhere. I had called Windows on the World. I had gone all over the city looking at the missing posters, trying to find somebody who matched this particular image. I'd had it. I'd done everything I could think of doing, and it wasn't working.
Then, late one night, wandering around Times Square, Chaney came across a poster of a missing man in a white jacket.
I had this instant sort of recognition. I thought it looked like the man in Richard Drew's picture. He looked an awful lot like him. And I almost doubted myself. I said, how is it possible that I would do all this work and then chance upon a poster in Times Square?
The number led to Milagros Hernandez. She and her family had pinned hundreds of posters across New York, desperate for any news about her brother, Norberto. He worked at Windows on the World.
I asked her if she and her family had seen the picture in the newspaper. She said yes. And I said, did you think it was your brother? She said yes. I said, well, I'd like to tell his story.
Milagros was eager that Chaney come with her to her brother's funeral and meet Norberto's family. But they were incensed when they discovered that a journalist was there.
I was standing there, crying, praying. I believe I turned back. I see a man with a photo. My aunt, I believe she called me over. And I cursed him. I told him to get out. That's not my father, get out. Excuse me for saying this, but if I had his address, I would go to his house and it wouldn't be so nice.
But some members of the extended family did identify Norberto as the falling man. Chaney went ahead and published his article. The story quickly spread around the world. When one of Norberto's daughters heard about it, she got on the internet to investigate.
When I typed up my dad's name on a search engine, there were 9,384 articles. I'm like, wow, let me open a couple. The Jumper. It was in Czechoslovakian, Yugoslavian, there was in Italian, French, and I can't read any of those languages, but I was able to pretty much read out Norberto Hernandez, Jumper, World Trade Center, and you see the picture.
Norberto's wife and 3 daughters refused to accept that the image was Norberto. It flew in the face of their family motto, together forever, and their faith.
My father, he was a gentle giant. He was 6'2", very quiet, humble. Barely heard him speak.
My father liked salsa, especially salsa cakes and el gran combo, Tito Rojas. He always was listening to that music.
He would never put us aside for anybody. I mean, he was the main guy, he was my father.
The thought that her father could have jumped had a profound psychological effect on Norberto's youngest daughter, Tatiana, 13 years old at the time.
I couldn't sleep. I thought it was the truth. I believed that. I was like, oh, it probably was him, And I started seeing him in the house. One time I saw him, creep over, and then he was smiling. And I was so scared, because I thought everyone else saw it. I was like, oh my God, did you see that? And they're like, what? What did you see? I'm like, didn't you see Papi?
Because of her daughter's trauma, Norberto's wife decided to leave the family home of 25 years. The family moved, hoping for some peace.
We were together for nearly 30 years, and I can put myself in his situation. There's a fire. I'm on the 107th floor. I'm not going to jump through the window, because I'm thinking, and I know what he was thinking. He was thinking of me, his daughters, his grandchildren, and his mother. I'm not going to jump. I'm going to try to escape any way possible, down the staircase, any way. But the last thing I would do is jump out of the window.
But it was more than grief that fueled the Hernandez's angry denial. It was something more fundamental.
I'll say it as is. Once a person commits suicide, their soul automatically goes to hell with no questioning. We weren't the most religious family, but we had our beliefs and we went to church. So by you calling him the Jumper, you're kind of saying that his soul is damned. You're telling me he's in hell. I think that's mostly what got to my mom. That's what got to me too.
To the Hernandezes, the thought of their Norberto jumping was impossible. To them, it was a betrayal of love and faith. To others, the idea of identifying the falling man smacked of voyeurism. The chef, Michael Lomanico, had worked with Norberto for nearly 14 years.
What do we stand to gain by identifying this person? What's the purpose of this? Why this exercise in trying to look at this photo and understand who's in it? What will we ever know about this photograph that it doesn't already say on its own?
But Tom Janot was sure that the only way to remove the stigma surrounding the falling man and the rest of the jumpers was to discover more about them.
I felt that the idea of people jumping, I felt that the jumpers, I felt that the falling man had been sort of pushed to the side. There was a an element of exclusion, that he died improperly, that we want to remember this day for its heroism. And whether we think of the jumpers as heroic or not, they should not be excluded from the consecrated ground of American soil because they died in a way that makes us uncomfortable.
Junot was convinced that America needed to confront the falling man, a harrowing symbol of 9/11, instead of pretending he didn't exist. He then found someone who provided justification for his mission, someone who'd found comfort and peace by accepting that his loved one may have jumped.
It had to be so intense up there, and there was no other way out, that it was either burn alive or go quickly. I envisioned that it had to be the towering inferno, and from the photos I saw, it obviously was. Who knows how much smoke was in there? You know, do you suffocate to death or do you jump? I think it was brave to do that. When the media started posting photographs, then I started searching to see if Karen was one of those jumpers. After a while, it just became an obsession with me. I was so intense on just finding something. I found some photos in my search that I think was Karen jumping. I know it's her because the clothes, the shape, I would know her from a shadow. She had a blue sweater top on, sleeveless, and cream-colored pants. If you look at the pictures that I have, I mean, that's what I see. It wasn't painful for some reason. It really wasn't. I finally, have something I can hold on to here. This is where she was, and this is how she died. She jumped. She didn't burn up. She didn't become dust. Nothing is more painful than losing her. But not knowing how I lost her was even more painful. So now that I believe that that's what took place, it's not painful for me to talk about it. And if she jumped, she jumped.
If Tom Junot wanted to create an acceptance of the image, he would first need to create an understanding of it. He then discovered from the photographer Richard Drew that the picture was just one of a sequence of 12.
When I looked at that series, the outtakes, the story became a different story for me. I thought it was probably a light-skinned black man, somebody who had his hair cut so short that you could see his scalp, somebody who was tall, kind of lanky. So that was also the beginning of me thinking that, well, this might not be Norberto Hernandez after all. This might be someone else.
For Tom Junot, the search for the falling man had just begun. As the months passed, the search for bodies was replaced by a clean-up operation. The goal now was to remove any reminder of the country's day of horror and begin the healing process. One memory had been wiped from the record long ago. The photograph of a man falling from the sky, and with it, the story of the jumpers. Writer Tom Junot wanted to make sure that healing didn't mean forgetting. If America accepted the image of the falling man, that would never happen. In his quest, he then discovered that the photograph was part of a sequence.
When I looked at that series, the outtakes, the story became a different story for me. He's clearly falling. It's not this almost Zen-like acceptance of his fate. He is panicking, he is rolling through the air. As he does that, the turbulence pulls his shirt off, and the white shirt that he's wearing comes off enough to reveal that he is wearing underneath that white shirt an orange t-shirt. Well, that was new information.
Junot reluctantly decided to contact the Hernandez family. He knew they were grief-stricken and angry at the media for naming Norberto. But if he could convince them to look at the new photos, he would be able to rule out or confirm Norberto as the falling man. Surprisingly, the family agreed to see him.
You go to the house, and it's essentially a shrine to Norberto and the life that they had with Norberto. And there's pictures of him, everywhere. In the beginning, Catherine did all the talking for her mother. But as time went on, Lyall became more and more eager to tell, the story. And her eagerness was expressed most positively when I asked her if she knew what Norberto had worn that morning. Was he wearing an orange t-shirt?
No. No, nunca. No, never. That day he was wearing black trainers, white socks, stonewashed blue jeans, and a blue-colored shirt with patterns.
La camisa igual, azul con diseño.
While speaking to the family, Junot was shocked to realize that none of them had ever looked at the original photo. The thought had been too painful. Here was an opportunity to confirm, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Norberto was not the falling man. He tentatively asked Catherine whether she wanted to look. She leapt at the chance.
As soon as I saw the picture, I was like, this is my guy. The facial and the color, it wasn't him. You could immediately tell it wasn't him.
Suddenly, Lyall was over our shoulders. She had come out, and she said, "Let me see those."
Yo estaba curiosa.
I was curious. I had to see it. I had to see it. It was obvious it wasn't him. From that day, everything changed at home. Everything changed. I changed. I was no longer in such a bad way. Before that, I was in a bad way. In a very bad way.
Catherine said, "I don't know what I would have done if that was my father. I think I would have had a nervous breakdown." Everything that they thought that their family represented was contradicted by this picture. The last thing that Lyall left me with, as I got in my car and left, she looked at me and she said, "Please clear my husband's name."
But Junot wanted to do more than clear Norberto's name. He wanted to clear the name of all the jumpers. He believed that by finding out more about the life and death of one man, he could do this. He looked again at the reporter Chaney's article.
When Peter Chaney did his story, The Falling Man, he thought he could see the face of the man and that he could see details that were enough. Chaney looked at that picture, saw the black pants, and said that he was a kitchen worker. But in fact, most kitchen workers in New York, at least, don't wear black pants. They wear these black and white check pants. But in fact, Norberto was a chef and would not have been wearing black pants. So I don't know who it is. I do know it's not Norberto Hernandez.
But Junot did agree with one thing in Chaney's article. the falling man had come from windows on the world.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the greatest bar here located at Windows on the World in the World Trade Center. My name is Ernie Scott.
Since opening in 1976, Windows had become a New York institution. Customers loved the location, and so did the staff. Many of them had worked there for years, which had created an unusual camaraderie among them.
It was just a good feel. It was a good place. You know, certain nights there'd be an incredible sunset. You know, we'd all stand there and go, wow, isn't that cool? You know, just tiny things like that, dumb things. You know, people that you met, things that you did, birthdays that you celebrated with each other. People that, you know, just became really part of your extended family every day.
That family had been devastated by September the 11th, when 79 of its members had perished. But could one of them have been the falling man? Juneau now hired a researcher to help him. They compiled a list of 22 possible names, based on age, race, and body type. They then asked surviving staff whether they would consider looking at the photos.
You're asking these people to look at something that could possibly be a colleague of theirs, could possibly be a good friend of theirs. This is not something that you're not looking through a high school yearbook with them. This is something that you've really got to approach respectfully.
For anyone who had lost a friend or colleague, this was a painful request. Most took some time to consider the idea.
I felt like it was my duty and my responsibility to help identify this person if I could. There might be somebody out there who would want to know that their father was in this picture, or their brother, or their son.
I was very nervous before I looked at the pictures. I was hopeful and terrified at the same time that I would know who it was. I guess in some ways I did want to know if it was one of our people, but I really didn't want it to be one of my people.
Not everyone felt they could help. Michael LaMonaco had stood and watched helplessly as smoke, then flames, then people poured out of his restaurant.
My reaction to the photographs was I didn't want to see them. I didn't want to be in the room with them. I didn't want to handle them. I didn't want to participate in this.
Other Windows staff agreed to meet with the researcher, who brought with him the Falling Man series of photos.
It was actually very easy to eliminate a lot of people right off the bat, and literally just went one by one, thinking about, was it this person? Was it this person? And reaching a conclusion at the end that it wasn't anyone that I could positively identify.
As time passed, more and more names on the list were ruled out. Not the right body type, not the right shoes, not the right hair. Finally, there were just a few names left, and one last staff member to look.
We went through those pictures with a fine-tooth comb. It didn't resonate in my mind that it was anybody from our staff. And in a way I felt really bad about that because you want to give somebody an answer. But in a way I was so glad it wasn't. So glad it wasn't.
The investigation had reached a dead end. America was moving on from September the 11th. The falling man was in danger of remaining in obscurity. Then, a breakthrough. The chef, Michael LaMonaco, agreed to look at the photos. A few days later, over lunch, he met with the researcher who had with him the pictures and the names that refused to go away.
No, it can't be Charlie Moore. Can't be Wilder. What about Junior? Can't be Junior. What about Jonathan? And he stopped. Michael took a real close look. It took a while for him to be ready to speak to me about that.
Jonathan was Jonathan Briley. He was a sound engineer who looked after conferences and functions at the restaurant.
Jonathan fit the body type, the size, coloration of the person in that photograph, and it left the door open for me that there was a possibility that it was really Jonathan. Which, having known Jonathan and really admired him and liked him, and I thought he was just a terrific person, a good guy, a hardworking, dedicated, good guy with a great sense of humor, and a person who embodied an individual that I could call friend and respect. It offered me no comfort to think, oh, that's Jonathan. If it is Jonathan, I can only feel so bad for him having to have suffered the way he did. And, you know, I miss him. He was somebody that I would have liked to have known forever.
Was Jonathan Briley a falling man? Every September the 11th, two giant shafts of light commemorate where the Twin Towers once stood. A dramatic image, but it gives no clue to the thousands who died that day. One man believed that a simple photo did. He now believed he knew who the man might be. Someone called Jonathan Briley. Now he needed confirmation from the family.
Of all the interviews, it was the most heartbreaking because Jonathan Briley's father was a preacher. He said, I'd like to talk to you, but I can't. For my life's work, I tell people that they have to go on after tragedy. And then he said in that same impossible voice, but I can't do this. I can't do it for myself.
The Reverend Briley suggested that Jeannot talk to Jonathan's older sister, Gwendolyn. She'd been especially close to Jonathan.
Jonathan Eric Briley was this person that just loved life and that it was contagious. So when you were around him, you couldn't help but smiling and laughing. Every time Jonathan comes to mind, he's walking and he's talking and he's smiling, and he had this bounce in his step. He was one of these special people that could spread himself around the whole family, and we all got our piece of Jonathan.
In the days after the attack, the Brileys waited for his return. A phone call, anything. As the days passed, their hopes of finding him alive faded. Reverend Briley gathered the family in prayer.
He talked to God like someone who absolutely knew that he existed. He says, I believe you can create a miracle. I want my miracle. He said, I have loved you. I do love you. I believe you. I have served you. I want to know where my son is. The next day, we got a phone call from the coroner. Said to come down. They found Jonathan. We knew where he was. That was a gift. That was a gift from God.
The coroner's office identified Jonathan through DNA and dental analysis. Jonathan's younger brother, Timothy, had the painful experience of confirming the identification.
Timothy recognized his shoes and his hands. He said, I would know my brother's hands and his feet. He took one of his shoes and he kept it. They were black tennis shoes, laced up, and then had that Velcro thing around the ankle. I didn't remember anything about an orange t-shirt, but when I talked with Timothy, he did. He talked about how Jonathan had this orange t-shirt and they would tease him because he wore it all the time.
Could Jonathan be the falling man?
When I first looked at it, it was almost like touching a hot stove. Your mind just I looked at the figure and I saw it was a man, tall, slim. Wow. I looked at it and I said, if I didn't know any better, that could be Jonathan.
But for Gwendolyn, the identity of the falling man didn't matter. She understood that it symbolized something far more significant than a single individual.
I never thought of the falling man as Jonathan. I thought of him as a man that just took his life in his hand for just that second. Did that person have so much faith that he knew that God would catch him? Or was he so afraid to experience the end up there? That's something I'll never know, because that happened to him. I hope we're not trying to figure out who he is, and more figure out who we are through watching that.
Tom Junot could never be absolutely certain that Jonathan Briley was the falling man. But he'd learned something far more important from Gwendolyn. The man's identity didn't matter. The power of the image came not because the falling man could be identified, but because he couldn't.
What that day needed more than anything else was essentially what a lot of other wars had, which was a tomb for the unknown. What makes the tomb of the unknown soldier so poignant is the fact that he is unknown. It's not the fact that he is identified, it's the fact that one has been made to stand for many. When Richard took that picture, I believe that he took a picture that really stood as the tomb of the unknown soldier for that day.
William Casillas.
Brian Joseph Katia.
Stephen Dennis Cavier.
Tom Junot's quest had revealed just how important the falling man was. The image didn't insult those who died. Rather, it was a fitting and just memorial to them, because it forced the world to acknowledge and remember the terrible events of that day.
One of the reasons why I became so determined to plumb the meaning of the falling man was that we can't hope to understand these incredible times unless we look at these images and accept the witness of these images. I mean, I think that looking at the falling man and to discuss it is the only option that we have, given that there is a falling man.